Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Tel Aviv, a city on Israel's Mediterranean coast, it's marked by the 1930s Bayes buildings, thousands of which are clustered in the White City architectural area. Listen to the hometown murder cases of Haim Arlosoroff, also known as Chaim Arlozorov. He was a Zionist leader of the Yishuv during the British Mandate for Palestine. In 1933, Arlosoroff was assassinated while walking in the beach in Tel Aviv. The second is Yaakov Alperon. He was an Israeli mobster, head of the Alperon criminal family, which became one of the largest organised crime syndicates in Israel, until his assassination by car bomb in 2008, and the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. It took place on the 4th of November 1995. The first case we're looking at today is Haim Arlosoroff. He was born in Romny, Russia in February 23rd, 1899. In Russia he was known as Vitaly, the Russian equivalent of Chaim. When living in Germany he was known as Victor. Arlosorov's paternal grandfather was Rabbi Eliezer Arlozorov of Romny, an author of religious commentaries on the Talmud. At the age of 6, Arlosoroff encountered anti-Semitism for the first time. In 1905, the family home in Romny was attacked during a violent pogrom. The family fled to the German border to East Prussia. 7 years later, the family settled in Königsberg, Germany, which is now the Russian city of Kaliningrad. Arlosoroff thus became fluent in German, in addition to studying Hebrew with a tutor. When World War I began in 1914, the family did not have German citizenship and was threatened with deportation. The family eventually obtained permission to move to Berlin. When his father's soul returned to Russia on business, he was barred from returning and died there of cholera. In 1930, Arlosoroff was influential in unifying the two major Zionist socialist political parties, the Poor Zion and the Hapa Hatza. This merger brought the establishment of the Mape Labour Party. Through this political muscle, Arlosoroff received an election as a member of the Zionist executive at the 1931 Zionist Congress. In addition, he was named political director of the Jewish Agency for Palestine, a prominent position he filled until 1933 and his assassination. At the Jewish Agency's political director, Arlosoroff first believed the British would help settle Jews in Palestine, so he worked with the British mandatory government, which was in charge of running that territory. Prior to his tenure as political director, Arlosoroff had already familiarised himself with the British system of rule, having written an essay titled "The British Administration and the Jewish National Home." During his years in office, Arlosoroff would develop close working relationships with the British High Commissioner Arthur Walshott and British Colonial Secretary Sir Philip Cunliffe Lister. Arlosoroff was a close friend of the Jewish scientist and statesman Chaim Weizmann. Dr. Weizmann was considered to be among the most politically motivated of Arlosoroff's Mape Zionist contemporaries. In months leading to assassination, Arlosoroff's fervour to help establish a Jewish national homeland intensified. At a council meeting occurring in January 1933, Arlosoroff strongly clashed with David Ben-Gurion and other prominent Mape leaders regarding whether or not the Zionists should work with British government's infrastructure to help bring about Jewish statehood. Arlosoroff warned his colleagues that if the Zionist movement maintained an isolation policy with the British ruling authorities, Arab political influence would increase within the British administration and cause the rights of Jewish people in Eretz Israel to suffer. In April 1933, Arlosoroff organised a historic event at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem on the Jewish Agency's behalf. The luncheon, attended by wise men and prominent Arab leaders of Transjordan, would be the first time Jewish Zionists and key Arabs gathered together to help promote cooperative effects between the two groups. Arlosoroff hoped that by building an accord with the Arab sheikhs of Transjordan, political relations with Arab leaders of mandatory Palestine might be enhanced. However, not everyone was pleased with Arlosoroff's vision for Jewish-Arab collaboration, nor the possibility of bi-nationalistic future in Eretz Israel. After the luncheon, Arab radicals openly chastised the moderate Arabs who attended the meeting. Certain Arab leaders in mandatory Palestine distanced themselves completely from Transjordan Arab delegation. Particular anger was directed at Transjordan Emir Abdullah, the ruler over large territories in Transjordan, who had taken a leading role in the conciliatory efforts. Jewish operations to the King David Hotel meeting also became apparent as the major party of religious Zionism, Mizrachi, demanded that Arlosoroff should resign from his position at the Jewish Agency. Some radicals in revisionist movement went even further and questioned Arlosoroff's right to be alive. As a result of Hitler's rise to power in Germany, Arlosoroff directed his focus to the plight of German Jews. The German Arlosoroff loved growing up changed quickly and drastically upon Hitler's rise to power. In April 1933, the new regime implemented the first of many anti-Jewish laws by terminating all Jewish employees from German government positions. Also at that time, Jewish and Nazi officials decreed Jewish people would not be permitted to leave the country without a specifically issued exit visa. On 16th, 1933, Haim Arlosoroff was murdered. He was killed while walking with his wife Sima on a beach in Tel Aviv. His funeral was the largest in the history of British Mandate of Palestine, with an estimated assembly of 70,000 to 100,000 mourners. The death greatly aggravated political relations with the Zionist movement. Abu Amira, the head of an activist group with fascist tendencies, the Brit Ha-Barumin, was charged by the Palestinian police force of plotting the assassination. He was a leader of the Nationalist Zionist Revolutionist faction, whose publication, Hazet Hayam, continuously attacked the labour movement and Zionist leaders, including that of Arlosoroff, calling him names and stating that the Jewish people, quote, will know how to react to such villains, end quote. Two rank-and-file revisionists, Abraham Stavsky and Zevi Rosenblatt, was arrested as the actual murderers and was identified by Arlosoroff's widow. All three denied the accusation. The district court acquitted Amir and Rosenblatt, but convicted Stavsky, who however was eventually acquitted by the Supreme Court for lack of corroborating evidence, as the law then required. The defence accused the police of manipulating the widow's testimony and other evidence for political reasons, and expanded the theory that murder was connected to an intended sexual attack on Sima by two young Arabs. Other theories connecting it to the murder were the Soviet and Nazi regimes. One involves Goebbels was supposedly sent two agents, Theo Korff and Heinz Geroda, to murder Arlosoroff. During her school days, Magda Ritschel, who later became the wife of Joseph Goebbels, met and became close friends with Lisa Arlosoroff and Chaim Arlozoroff's sister. Magda met Chaim at university. They became lovers and got involved with him in Zionist affairs. According to Lisa's diary, Magda frequently participated in debates of the group on the future of Palestine and learnt Hebrew. She wore a necklace with the Star of David he had given her as a love token, and even planned to emigrate to Palestine together. The second case we're looking at is Jacob Alperon. He was an Israeli mobster and head of a criminal family, and died by assassination, a car bomb, in 2008. He was born in Israel in 1955 to a full family of Jewish immigrants from Egypt, and grew up in a small apartment in Givat Shima. Alperon and his brothers learned boxing and began taking over small businesses in the area before eventually The family gained power by protection rackets across the Gush Dan region of Israel. Alperon was first arrested when he was in his 20s, and in 1993 he was jailed for 4.5 years after police shut down his extortion business. 2 of his brothers, Nissim and Zalman, was also convicted. Alperon's main enemies included Zez Rosenstein, a notorious drug lord in Israel who also been target of murder attempts, and Abtul Abul and Abraham families over the money for bottle recycling, an industry that brings in $5 million a year based on police estimates. As part of a protection racket offered to restaurant owners, the businesses would pay for the mobsters' services by leaving empty bottles, which would leave no documentation and could be redeemed for cash to provide an apparent legitimate revenue source. In March 2004, Israeli police arrested suspected contract killers from Belarus, been found with weapons, including explosives, and shoulder-held missile launchers at their hideout. The arrested hitmen had been accused of involvement in a failed murder attempt against Yaakov Alperon in December 2003, and early attempts that same year against Alperon's brother Nissim, and another attack against a member of a crime family linked with the Alperons. On January 2nd, 2006, a summit between Alperon and a rival gangster, Haim Arlosoroff, was held at a hotel north of Tel Aviv with the intention to address their differences. The arbitration efforts failed. Gun and knife fights broke out, resulting in Molnar being stabbed in the neck, allegedly by Alperon. Afterwards, Alperon and his son went into hiding and were not found despite a 2-month or nationwide search. However, the two later turned themselves into police custody. In March 2006, Alperon and his brother Reuven was charged with making threats, attempted assault, and intentionally damaging a car for their involvement in the incident. Shortly before his death, an article published in Haaretz indicated that Alperon had been involved in heat and oil schemes with other gangsters. Alperon had also been involved in setting up internet cafes during a time when few had computer access in home, in which the fee paid for the use of the computer would be paid in cash to the restaurant and then be used to gamble on the computer. The internet business was shut down in spring 2002 after mounting costs started to exceed the gambling revenues. Alperon had served prison terms on multiple occasions and had just been released from a 10-month prison sentence served as part of a plea deal. He had been arrested for stabbings, assault, blackmail, intimidation over the course of his career. The 53-year-old Alperon was killed on November 17, 2008 by a bomb explosion in his white Volkswagen Jetta at the crowded intersection of Yehuda Maccabi Street and Nemas Road in Tel Aviv. The explosion resulted in Alperon's death, and at least 3 other people were wounded, including a 13-year-old boy. Police were trying to determine the identity of the vehicle that had been spotted driving away from the site of the explosion. The body was identified as wearing the same shirt that Alperon had been wearing in court for the incident of his son and related charges. His funeral on November 18, 2008 at the Rahana Cemetery was attended by thousands, including several well-known Israeli underworld figures. At the gravesite, one of Alperon's sons was quoted as saying, quote, "We will find the man who did this. I will send this man to God. He won't have a grave because I'll cut off his arms, his head and his legs," end quote. Alperon's brother, Nissim Alperon, served numerous assassination attempts, including one in 2000, 2002, 2006, 2012, 2013, and 2 in 2003 and 2007, some of which involved car bombs. As reported, a car explosion in Tel Aviv in January 2013, likely wounding 7 people, may have been a further assassination attempt against him, but he managed to escape unscathed. The last case we're looking at is the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. He was the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister at the time, and this was a culmination of an anti-violence rally in support of the Oslo peace process. Rabin was disparaged personally by right-wing conservatives and Likud leaders who perceived the Oslo peace process as an attempt to forfeit the occupied territories and a capitulation to Israel's enemies. National religious conservatives and Likud party leaders believed that withdrawing from any Jewish land was heresy. The Likud leader and future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Rabin's government of being, quote, removed from Jewish tradition and Jewish values, end quote. Right-wing rabbis associated with the settlers movement prohibited territorial concessions to the Palestinians and forbade soldiers in the Israeli Defense Force from evacuating Jewish settlers under the Accords. Some rabbis proclaimed Din Rodeh based on the traditional Jewish law of self-defense against Rabin personally, arguing that Oslo Accords would endanger Jewish lives. Rallies organised by Likud and other right-wing groups featured depictions of Rabin in Nazi SS uniform or in the crosshairs of a gun. Protesters compared the Labour Party to the Nazi and Rabin to Adolf Hitler. They chanted, "Rabin is a murderer and Rabin is a traitor." In July 1995, Netanyahu led a mock funeral procession featuring a coffin and hangman's noose at an anti-Rabin rally where protesters chanted "Death to Rabin." The chief internal security, Chaim Arlozorov, then alerted Netanyahu of a plot of Rabin's life and asked him to moderate the protesters' rhetoric, which Netanyahu declined. Netanyahu denied any intention to incite violence. Rabin dismissed such protests or labelled them kibbutz. According to Gillen, and Rabin refused his request to wear a bulletproof vest and preferred not to use the armoured car purchased for him. Left-wing supporters organised peace rallies in support of the Oslo Accords. It was after one such gathering in Tel Aviv that the assassination took place. The assassin was Yigal Amir, a 25-year-old former Hesder student and a far-right law student at Bar Ilan University. Amir had strenuously opposed Rabin's peace initiative, particularly the signing of the Oslo Accords, because he felt that an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank would deny Jews their biological heritage, which they reclaimed by establishing settlements. Amir had come to believe that Rabin was a Rudolph, meaning a pursuer who endangered Jewish lives. The concept of Din Rodef, law of the pursuer, is a part of traditional Jewish law. Amir believed he would be justified under Din Rodef if removing Rabin as a threat to Jews in the territories. In the Israeli settlements, pamphlets debating the validity of applying Din Rodef and Din Moser, law of the informer, to Rabin and the Oslo Accords were distributed at synagogues. Both carried a death sentence according to traditional halakhic law. There was a disagreement among religious Zionists as whether Amir even secured authorization from a rabbi to carry out the assassination of Rabin. His father later said that in the months before the assassination, Amir repeatedly said, quote, that the Prime Minister should be killed because of Din Rodef was issued against him, end quote. During his later trial, Amir stated, quote, I acted according to Din Rodef. It was not a personal act. I just wanted to be removed from his position, end quote. For his radical activities, Yigal Amir had been brought under attention by the Israeli Internal Security Service, but the organisation only had information on Amir's attempt on creating an anti-Arab militia, not on comments regarding assassinating Rabin, which he openly stated to a number of people. Another incident describing Amir's comments to a fellow student about stating the video prior to an earlier aborted attempt on his life was ignored by the organisation as non-credible. The source refused to name Amir by name, but instead described him as a short Yemeni guy with curly hair. After the rally, Rabin walked down the city hall steps towards the open door of his car, at which time Amir fired 3 shots at Rabin with a Beretta 84F semi-automatic pistol. He was immediately subdued by Rabin's bodyguards and arrested with the murder weapon. The 3rd shot missed Rabin and slightly wounded security guard Yoram Rubin. Rabin was rushed to a nearby hospital at the Tel Aviv Israel Medical Center, where he died on the operating table from blood loss and a punctured lung within 40 minutes. Rabin's bureau chief, Eitan Heber, announced outside the gates of the hospital, quote, "The government of Israel announces in consternation, in great sadness and in deep sorrow, the death of Prime Minister and Minister of Defense Yitzhak Rabin, who was murdered by assassin tonight in Tel Aviv. The government shall convene in 1 hour for a morning session in Tel Aviv. Blessed be his memory." End quote. In Rabin's pocket was a blood-stained sheet of paper with the lyrics to the well-known Israeli song Shir LaShalom, Song for Peace, which was sung at a rally and dwells on the impossibility of bringing a dead person back to life and therefore the need for peace. The funeral of Rabin took place on November the 6th, 2 days after the assassination at Mount Herzl Cemetery in Jerusalem, where Rabin was later buried. Hundreds of world leaders, including about 80 heads of state, attended the funeral. Presidents of the United States, Bill Clinton, King Hussein of Jordan, Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands, Russian Prime Minister Viktor Shchernomyrdin, Spanish Prime Minister and European Council President in Office Felipe González, Prime Minister of Canada Jean Chrétien, Acting Israeli Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, United Nations Security General Boutros Ghali, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, President of the Republic of Congo Denis Sassou Nguesso, and President of Israel Ezer Weizmann were among those present. A national memorial day for Rabin is set on the date of his death, according to the Hebrew calendar. Rabin's assassination was a shock to the Israeli public. Rallies and memorials took place near Kings of Israel Square, later renamed Rabin Square, in his honour, as well as near Rabin's home, the Kesnet building, and the home of the assassin. Many other streets and public buildings around the country were named for Rabin as well. The assassination has been described as emblematic of a cultural struggle between religious right-wing and secular left-wing forces within Israel. Ilan Peleg of the Middle East Institute has described Rabin's assassination as, quote, reflecting a deep cultural divide within Israel's body of political, intimately connected with the peace process, which illustrates both increased polarization and political conflict in the country, end quote. On the 28th of March 1996, the Shamgar Commission issued its final report into the assassination. It was critical of Shin Bet for putting the Prime Minister at risk and ignoring threats to his life from Jewish extremists. Thank you for everybody who's listened to this episode. This episode has been researched, written and hosted by me, Andrew Knight. Sound, music and editing has been provided by Harry Edmondson. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere where you listen to your podcast. This allows the episode to be downloaded automatically as soon as it's released. Please reach out to us on the social media. We're at Hometown Murders on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating or a review. It really does help.